All right, get ready, because today we are really going deep. We're tackling Vladimir Putin.
Taking a real deep dive into the mind of Putin.
Yeah, and you've sent us a ton of stuff. We've got, like, historical analysis, psychological profiles.
Oh, yeah.
And even some, honestly, kind of creepy comparisons to Stalin.
Yeah, and that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, right?
Right.
We're not just looking at, like, biographical details.
No.
We're trying to really get inside Putin's head, understand, like, what makes him tick, you know?
Yeah.
The why behind his actions.
Totally. Like, how does someone go from KGB agent to, well, arguably the most powerful man in the world?
I mean, that's a question a lot of people have asked.
For real. And to really get that, we got to rewind, right? Go back to Putin's early days, specifically his time in Dresden as the Berlin Wall was coming down.
Yeah.
I mean, picture this. 1989, the wall is literally crumbling, and here's Putin, this mid-level KGB officer, basically stuck in his outpost.
What's interesting there is not just that, he kind of bluffed his way out, claiming it was still Soviet territory.
Right.
But how much that whole Soviet collapse really got to him. He actually called it and this is a quote, greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century.
Wow.
And this wasn't just him, towing the party line. This was personal.
So you're saying that experience, that humiliation, the loss, it really stuck with him, shaped him.
Oh, absolutely. It's crucial to understanding his worldview today.
Yeah.
Because Putin, he doesn't just want to rebuild Russia. He wants to reclaim its past glory. The Soviet Union, that whole image of power. He's fixated on it.
So it's about power then, more than even, say, money or ideology.
Power is a huge factor, definitely. But it's also about security, in his mind. He sees enemies everywhere, the West, NATO, anyone he sees as a threat. It's all very much like a zero-sum game for him.
Which kind of explains his actions, when you think about it. Georgia, Syria, and obviously Ukraine. He's got to be the big dog, right?
Yeah, he's all about projecting strength, no question. But it goes deeper than that. We've got sources here that point to a really disturbing trend in his military strategies, a disregard for human life, even his own people.
Yeah, the whole cannon fodder thing is pretty disturbing.
Exactly. He's willing to accept huge losses to get what he wants, even using convicts as basically disposable troops. It's a very, very cold calculation.
It's like he's using tactics straight out of the Stalin playbook.
The comparisons to Stalin are definitely there, especially when you see how Russia uses soldiers from marginalized communities.
Yeah, that's really troubling. I mean, what we're hearing about how they're treated.
Right, it's awful. They're often poorly equipped, given the most dangerous assignments, and treated as completely expendable.
It's like a cruel echo of how the Soviet Union used its own people.
Exactly. And it's not just on the battlefield either. Look at how Putin deals with dissent at home, the control of the media, the silencing of opposition voices.
Yeah, it's all very familiar, unfortunately.
Right. And that brings up a big question. Is this just Putin's Russia? Or is Putin a product of Russia itself?
Like, is he just this uniquely ruthless guy? Or does he embody something deeper within the system?
Exactly. Is he a symptom or the disease? Because to really understand what's going on, we have to look at the system he operates in.
So unpack that a bit for us. What's important about that system?
Well, for starters, even though Russia moved away from Soviet-style communism, it's still a very state-controlled system.
Right.
Power and wealth are concentrated at the top, maintained by, among other things, a very carefully crafted narrative.
You're talking about propaganda, right? Controlling the story.
Exactly. And Putin's propaganda machine isn't just about spreading lies. It's about distorting history, shaping reality to fit his agenda.
It's like he's trying to control how people see the past, the present, everything.
And that's a key insight because it suggests that even Putin's perception of reality might be warped by the very propaganda he uses to control others.
It's like a hall of mirrors, right? Hard to know what's real anymore.
Exactly. It's a dangerous feedback loop, and it could have really bad consequences. Like that saying, repeat a lie often enough, and it becomes the truth.
Whoa, yeah. And Putin's got a firm grip on that narrative.
He does. And that makes you wonder, how much does he actually believe?
That's a good question. Is this calculated manipulation or genuine belief?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to get an answer, we need to go beyond Putin himself.
Beyond Putin. So where do we go from here?
We need to understand the system he embodies, unravel the historical and cultural threads that created Putin's Russia.
Okay, so we need to go deeper, look back in time to really get the full picture.
Exactly. We need to see Putin in context, not just as an individual, but as a product of his environment.
All right, so let's unpack that. Is there something about Russia itself, its history, its culture, that makes this pattern of authoritarianism so persistent?
It's really striking when you look back, right? How many of the patterns we're seeing in Russia today, you know, like the way power is centralized, dissent is shut down,
Right.
how readily they use military force.
Yeah.
Those have really deep roots in Russian history.
So we're talking about like the czars and all that.
Exactly. The czars weren't exactly known for being like champions of democracy.
Right, that's an understatement.
And while, the Soviet era obviously brought about massive change, upheavals,
Okay.
it also kind of reinforced certain aspects of that authoritarian tradition. Think about it. The Communist Party, for all its talk about, the workers and equality,
Yeah.
they ended up just replicating a lot of those czarist structures of control, just, with a different coat of paint.
So was the fall of the Soviet Union like a real break from the past then? Or did the system just kind of, I don't know, morph, adapt, survive?
It's tricky, right? Because it's kind of both. And we see this not just in the institutions, but in the culture too,
Yeah.
The idea of this strong leader, the Vozhd, like almost this father figure to the nation.
Right.
That's deeply ingrained in Russian history and in the Russian psyche too.
Interesting. Okay, so there's this historical kind of, I don't know, predisposition towards strongman rule, but it's not like every country with a history of authoritarianism like gets stuck there forever.
Right.
There's got to be more to it. What else are we missing?
Well, for sure. One thing that's really important is like the resilience of the elites.
Elites.
Yeah. So when the Soviet Union fell apart, you had all these people in positions of power.
Right.
Former party members, KGB guys.
Right.
And they managed to hold on to a lot of their influence.
So it's like less about things actually changing, more about the people in charge staying in charge.
Exactly. They just kind of swapped the party cards for like business suits.
Yeah.
And kept on going.
Wow.
And those elites, they have a huge interest in keeping the system that benefits them going. And that means
Like system where?
A system where dissent is crushed, where the media is controlled, where independent institutions are weak.
So basically a system where they can do whatever they want and get away with it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And that brings us right back to Putin, right? Because he's not just shaped by this system, he's also incredibly good at using it.
Master manipulator, like we were talking about.
Totally. And let's not forget, this is a guy who came up through the KGB.
Right.
He understands power, how to get it, how to use it, and maybe most importantly, how to hold on to it.
It's like this whole system is, I don't know, tailor-made for a guy like him to rise up in.
And he's definitely made the most of it. It's why it's so difficult to imagine real change happening in Russia as long as these dynamics are in play.
So you've got the system that's practically hardwired for authoritarianism. Then you've got a leader who's like a master at playing the game.
Right.
Honestly, it's kind of terrifying.
It is a bit, yeah. It's a good reminder, though, I think, that political systems, they're resilient. They can be really hard to change, even when there are these moments that seem like, huge turning points.
Yeah.
A lot of times those underlying dynamics, the power structure.
They stay the same.
Exactly.
Which makes you think, like, even if something happened and Putin, I don't know, disappeared tomorrow.
It's totally possible that Russia would find itself right back where it started.
Wow. Stuck in this loop, just with a new czar, same old crown.
It's a real possibility, yeah. And that's why just focusing on Putin, just on him as an individual.
Right.
It misses the bigger picture. It misses these deeper forces that are at work.
Hey, so it's like you were saying before, if the system itself is the problem,
Right.
how do you even begin to change something that's so good at resisting change? That's got to be a tough one.
There's no easy answers there, that's for sure. But I think one thing's for certain, understanding how this system works, the historical patterns,
Right.
that's a crucial first step.
Knowledge is power, right. But in this case, it feels like we're dealing with a whole lot of power and not nearly enough knowledge. So how do we start to close that gap?
Well, we've talked about those echoes of authoritarianism in Russia's history, but I think we also need to get into some of the specific comparisons people make between Putin and some of his predecessors, specifically Stalin. There's a lot there, and you marked a bunch of sources that get into that.
Yeah, the whole Putin-Stalin thing. People love to make that comparison.
Yeah, it comes up a lot, and I get it. There are definitely similarities there, like the way they disregard human life, the way they go after anyone who disagrees with them,
Right.
how they create this atmosphere where everyone's afraid to speak out, and the propaganda, too.
Right.
The way Putin uses it to control the narrative, to silence any opposing voices.
Yeah.
It's got some chilling echoes of Stalin's playbook for sure.
Yeah, the whole cannon fodder thing, for starters, that's pretty damn similar.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that the disregard for human life, it wasn't just confined to the battlefield, you know.
What do you mean?
For either of them, both Stalin and Putin, they were masters of repression, crushing any kind of opposition.
Oh.
And they did it systematically.
Okay, there's got to be a difference in scale, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff that went down during Stalin's reign of terror, the sheer numbers.
Oh, absolutely. What happened under Stalin, the level of death, suffering, it's almost impossible to comprehend today. And while Putin's regime, yeah, it's brutal, no question.
Right.
It hasn't, at least not yet, reached that level of systematic horror. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of people dying.
God. Yeah, that's a whole other level.
It is. And it's something that I think we have to keep in mind, especially with what's going on in Ukraine right now.
Because things could escalate.
That's the danger, right? Of
Right.
drawing too straight a line between the past and present. We have to be careful about that.
So you're saying the Stalin comparison, it's tempting,
Yeah.
but maybe not totally accurate.
It's complicated. I mean, are there echoes?
Yeah.
For sure. But there are also these really important differences.
Like,
The context is totally different, the ideology. And the world has changed a lot since Stalin, you know? Putin isn't just like replaying Stalin's greatest hits from some, I don't know, authoritarian playlist.
right.
But at the same time, I think looking at those parallels, those echoes, it can help us understand things better.
So it's not about saying Putin is Stalin, it's about...
It's about recognizing those patterns because they can repeat, you know,
Yeah.
and they can escalate.
So it's like a cautionary tale, a reminder that history has a way of, I don't know, rhyming, maybe?
Totally. And a reminder that we need to understand these guys, these leaders, but also the forces that create them.
We gotta zoom out.
Zoom out to get the full picture.
It's like we're trying to figure out how one ant works by studying, like, this whole massive ant colony.
Exactly. We got to zoom out to really get it right. And that brings up, I think, a really big question.
Okay, hit me.
Is Putinism, this thing we've been talking about, is it just like a particularly nasty version of Russian political culture?
Right.
Or is it something, I don't know, more contagious? Something that could, you know, take root somewhere else if the conditions were right.
Because let's be real, this whole strongman thing, it's not like it's unique to Russia anymore.
Right.
We're seeing it pop up all over the globe.
Yeah, and it's more than just like these leaders being charismatic, right?
Right.
There's an appeal to fear, to resentment. It's like people wanting simple answers to these really complex problems.
Which, let's face it, the world's got plenty of those right now.
Exactly. And those kinds of appeals, they can be really powerful.
For sure.
Especially when things are uncertain or scary. You know, like when the economy's a mess, people are worried about their livelihoods. Nobody trusts the government.
So that's when this stuff gets really dangerous, right?
That's when authoritarianism goes from like this fringe idea to something a lot more tempting.
It's like, I don't know, it's a human problem then, not just a Russian problem. Like, we're all vulnerable to this given the right, I don't know, the right pressures, the right kind of manipulation.
I think so, yeah, to some extent. The need to feel safe, the desire for a leader who will come in and fix everything.
Right.
Those are pretty universal.
So how do we fight that? How do you not fall for it?
Well, that's where understanding comes in, right?
Knowledge is power, like we were saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The more we get how these systems work, the patterns, the ways they exploit our psychology,
Yeah.
the better we can resist them.
So we need to be like our own bodyguards, almost. Guarding our minds against propaganda, disinformation, all that stuff.
100%. Don't just take things at face value. Question your assumptions.
Right.
Look for different perspectives. Be wary of anyone with easy answers. Or anyone trying to tell you it's someone else's fault, you know. Scapegoats, all that.
Don't be so quick to point the finger.
Exactly. Those are the habits, the thought processes that help you see through the BS.
It's like we need to cultivate a healthy skepticism, and not just about, you know, governments, institutions,
Right.
but about our own biases too.
Like, absolutely. We're all biased, you know. The key is being aware of it.
Yeah. So thinking for ourselves, basically.
And that, I think, is really what we're talking about here. This whole deep dive into Putin, into Russia. It's not just about understanding them.
It's about understanding ourselves.
It's about understanding power, how it works, how it repeats, and how to resist it.
Yeah.
Because those are battles, honestly.
Yeah.
Those are battles that are never really over.
And that's what we've been diving deep into today. You've been listening to The Deep Dive.
Thanks for being here.
And we'll be back next time with a whole new topic to explore. Until then, stay curious out there.